Buckley versus Valeo is one of the first and most important Supreme Court cases in the modern campaign finance era,
in which the court addressed an attempt by Congress to create comprehensive campaign finance reform.
Was they ruled that campaign contributions, a direct, say I was writing a check out to a political candidate, that would be a direct contribution. And if it was large enough, it would have the potential to corrupt that elected official.
I think people are under the impression that the corruption only involves somebody handing over a check and getting a favor, and that's not the case.
Corruption has been long understood by the Supreme Court as guarding against undue access, undue influence that large donors will receive in exchange for their political contributions.
In the 1970s, legal scholarship seemed to move away from this definition. In fact, seemed to forget what our founding fathers had written into law and into regulation to prevent corruption.
The 1976 Supreme Court case, Buckley v. Valeo, has been interpreted as explicitly limiting the scope of what constitutes corruption, effectively disregarding any other form of corruption other than bribery, which was already illegal.
The Supreme Court has a very strange definition of corruption. It defines it as only quid pro quo.
It's taken corruption from being understood as undue access and undue influence to basically just saying you can't have bribery. We need these laws in place to guard against quid pro quo.
The first dangerous move that we saw was after Watergate.
And so Congress then attempted to create a fairly comprehensive campaign finance reform, and that begins the modern era of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment and applying it to campaign finance.
The court says government may not regulate the expenditures because that kind of regulation cuts too close to the heart of political speech.
The court in Buckley v. Valeo made a distinction between direct campaign contributions and independent expenditures, which is spending to call for the election or defeat of a candidate without officially coordinating with the candidate's campaign. According to the court, unlimited spending to ensure a candidate's victory or failure does not have sufficient corrupting influence for the government to step in.
But what the decision essentially said was that money is the equivalent of speech, and therefore spending money to influence political campaigns would be protected by the First Amendment.
Any independent expenditure was not corruptive and therefore a form of speech. And because it's a form of speech, any limits placed on that would be a limit on the First Amendment.
The application of the First Amendment to campaign finance is a post-Watergate phenomenon, post-1976 phenomenon.
Now, according to the court's logic, people can spend as much money as they want because it's independent of campaigns, and campaigns and candidates won't be responsive to money that's independent because it didn't flow through their bank account. They're not going to feel any debt of gratitude. That's the court's logic.
I'm talking about giving a gift to somebody who makes a decision on behalf of the public. At the end of the day, that's really what bribery is, but it is done every day.
I think most people and most candidates know very well that whether the money goes directly to their campaign or whether it's spent so-called independently, those candidates are going to owe a debt of gratitude to anybody spending money on their behalf, saying vote for this person or vote against that person.
In the Federalist Papers defending our Constitution, it said we need a Congress dependent on the people alone and not the rich more than the poor.
We have a system in this country where half of 1% of the American population is responsible for 60% of political contributions.
In the lobbying world, we don't have one person, one vote. We have lobbying capacity associated with financial capacity.
And I think the question that we have to ask as Americans is whether this type of inequality in this system is something that we are willing to put up with.
There's huge percentages of the American public that simply are not part of the lobbying game.
Maybe we ought to think about equality and campaign financing to assure that everybody's voice gets heard.
It's pretty straightforward. Structure determines function. If we want the function of our government to be for the people, then the structure of the elections need to work for the people.
Do you think it's possible for regular citizens to get involved on the same scale?
No. I would love to say that I have a magic solution, but it's not possible.